The Decline of the Kingdoms. The Untold Story of the Rise and Fall of Kings. Series, The Great Universal Crusade, Book 6. Written by Felipe Chavarro Polania. Narrated by Dwayne DeSalvo. Between Stories and Betrayals.
Had Harim alone been faithful to our God, the kingdom of darkness would now be in mourning instead of us,
said Cadmiel, lamenting after a strenuous ride.
Baraka died fighting for the faith he had sworn to protect. We should mourn him, honor him for his great courage. But this is not the time. There is no time to mourn. We have slightly wounded the kingdom of darkness, but there are still many settlements around this world controlled by the evil one. We have won a battle, but not the war.
But what a battle we have fought.
Balthazar interjected enthusiastically.
In all my years in the kingdom of Asab, I have never seen such a victory. Not to mention the last battle that was fought on the walls of Asab. I believe that rebellious angel lost 100 fighters for every one of ours that fell. Moreover, we have now learned firsthand the plans and the stratagems of the kingdom of darkness, and now we can share them with all our brethren in the faith who are scattered throughout the world. There is no doubt that as soon as they hear of all these things, sooner or later, they will join in this hard battle that is to be fought until the end of time.
Balthazar is right.
Brahma raised his head and brushed his hair out of his eyes.
But we must not forget that we still have many hurdles to overcome.
The black vultures circled slowly around the travelers, and a dull hissing sound was produced as the wind brushed against the edges of their wings. Mysteriously, this almost inaudible sound enveloped them like a veil and made them all insanely afraid. Meanwhile, the sun shone mercilessly high in the sky. The heat made mysterious ripples on the sand dunes. A trickle of sweat trickled down the foreheads and cheeks of each member of the group. They rode slowly, constantly besieged by the intense heat and the curtains of sand that were falling over them, thanks to the maritime wind from the northeast. Soon, they would reach the shores of the mythical Red Sea for the first time. That sea that the people of Israel had crossed thanks to the right hand of the one God who made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and who keeps and maintains the truth forever. For a short time, but for them a long and strenuous one, the only sounds to be heard were the hoofbeats of horses on the arid and rocky earth, the clink of their armor that now weighed them down like leaden sacks, the dull hisses of the black vultures that stalked them along the way, and the somber but very distant voices behind them. Cadmiel looked at the black vultures. They were the largest birds he had ever seen in his life. They were very dark brown in color and all wore a ruff of feathers around their necks. The inhabitants of that region nicknamed the black vultures the guardians of the Sea of Blood, because of their great size, as well as the old stories told of their connection with the Red Sea. These creatures were very peculiar, as their heads were covered with a short, grayish-brown down, and the base of their huge, stout beaks were bluish in color. They looked very black from a distance, but appearances were deceptive. They lived in very rough and arid coastal areas, and were believed to be the most rapacious and ferocious birds on the entire continent. They were also said to devour men and horses alike if given the chance, and to circle over the dead and dying. Samgar detested them, for every time he had seen them in the sky, a sea of blood had been spilled. It was for this very reason that many said that these birds flew very close to the sea that had been the scene of that story of old that told how the armies of Pharaoh, after preparing their chariots, had pursued the Israelites in order to destroy them. A story that testifies how the greatest army of that time had been crushed by the highest walls ever recorded by the human eye since the beginning of time. The waters of the Red Sea were those walls that the true God had raised on his right and on his left to crush the most numerous armies of that time, and all just after the prayer of one man. But let us return to the birds, for about them also we have much to say. They are said to have dwelt near the shores of the Red Sea ever since the Israelites had crossed it. For at that time, and as they flew wandering, they met with a great feast of men and horses. And because of the great quantity of food which they found by the providence of the arm of the true God, they had to settle on the shores for many days. In the end, the days became months, and the months became years, and the years became millennia to the present day. A black vulture swooped down at that moment and landed on the rump of Sir's stallion, and the horse reared up and wagged its tail furiously as if trying to shake it off. But Sir did not react violently, but calmed his horse by patting him on the top and withers until the horse calmed down. And so it was that a new winged and colossal companion joined them in the Great Crusade. Surprisingly, they all rode in silence without a word, for they suspected that surely Sir was up to something. And so they rode with their eyes fixed on the shores that no longer seemed so far away, holding the reins of their horses loosely in their hands. At that time, it was hard for them all to think that their enemies were pursuing them, and even harder for them to keep up with them. So they soon felt that there was a great distance between them and the cavern where they had been held captive for so many days. And so they began to chat and sing psalms. And so they forgot all about the dark recesses of the cavern, and more importantly, they forgot the barren and uncertain path that lay ahead of them. But at dusk, when the shadows fell and the crests of the desert dunes glistened in the light of the setting sun, they made camp as best they could, gathering up the skins they had managed to save after their last battle, to make a very narrow tent for all of them. But, well, they had no choice but to be content with being alive. Then they stood guard, and most of them slept very restlessly, having dreams in which they heard howls of hellish creatures hunting them, and horrendous screams like the ones they had heard during their stay in the Shadim's cave. As for Cadmiel, powerful visions of God overwhelmed him, and this is what he saw.
Then the Lord gave Moses the following instructions.
Command the Israelites to turn back and camp near Pi-Hahiroth between Migdol and the sea. Let them camp there along the shore opposite Baal-Zephon. Then Pharaoh will think, the Israelites are confused, they are trapped in the desert. And once again I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will go out and pursue them. I will do this to show my glory through Pharaoh and all his army. Then the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord.
So the Israelites camped where they were told. When news reached the king of Egypt that the Israelites had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds.
What have we done by allowing all these Israelite slaves to leave?
They asked. So Pharaoh prepared his chariot and called for his troops. He took with him 600 of the best chariots, along with the other chariots of Egypt, each with its own commanding officer. So the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who therefore went out in pursuit of the Israelites, who had gone off with fists raised in defiance. The Egyptians pursued them with all the forces of Pharaoh's army, all his horses and his chariots, his drivers and his troops, and overtook the people of Israel as they camped by the sea near Pi-Hahiroth, opposite Baal-Zephon. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up and were filled with panic as they saw the Egyptians catching up with them. Then they cried out to the Lord and said to Moses,
"Why did you bring us here to die in the desert? Were there not enough graves for us in Egypt? What have you done to us? Why did you force us out of Egypt? Did we not tell you this would happen when we were still in Egypt? We told you! Leave us alone. Let us remain slaves of the Egyptians. It is better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the desert."
But Moses said to them,
"Do not be afraid. Just stand still and watch how the Lord will rescue you today. Those Egyptians you see now, you will never see them again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just be still."
Then the Lord said to Moses,
Why do you cry out to me? Tell the people to set out. Take your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea. Divide the waters so that the Israelites can pass through the middle of the sea, treading dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they will turn against the Israelites. The greatness of my glory will be displayed through Pharaoh and his army, his chariots and his drivers. When my glory is displayed through them, all Egypt will see my glory, and know that I am the Lord."
Then the angel of God, who was in front of the people of Israel, moved to the rear of the camp. The pillar of cloud also shifted and moved behind them. The cloud stood between the Egyptians and the camp of the Israelites. At sunset, the cloud turned to fire and lit up the night. But the Egyptians and the Israelites did not come near each other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord opened a way through the waters by means of a strong east wind. The wind blew all night and turned the seabed into dry land. Then the people of Israel crossed through the midst of the sea, walking on dry land, with walls of water on either side. Then the Egyptians, with all the chariots and their drivers, and with Pharaoh's horses, chased the Israelites into the midst of the sea. But shortly before dawn, the Lord looked down on the Egyptian army from the pillar of fire and cloud, and caused great confusion in their fighting forces. He twisted the wheels of the chariots so that they were difficult to steer.
Let's get out of here. Let's get away from the Israelites.
The Egyptians shouted.
The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt.
When all the Israelites had reached the other side, the Lord said to Moses,
"Stretch out your hand over the sea again, and the waters will return in force and cover the Egyptians, their chariots and their drivers."
Then, as the sun began to rise, Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the waters returned with force to their normal state. The Egyptians tried to escape, but the Lord dragged them into the sea. Immediately the waters returned to their place and covered all the chariots and their drivers, Pharaoh's entire army. Not one of the Egyptians who entered the sea to pursue the Israelites survived. Instead, the people of Israel walked through the midst of the sea on dry ground, while the waters stood like walls on either side. This is how the Lord rescued Israel that day from the hands of the Egyptians, and the Israelites saw the dead bodies of the Egyptians on the seashore. When the people of Israel saw the great power that the Lord had unleashed against the Egyptians, they were filled with awe before him. Then they put their faith in the Lord and in his servant Moses.
Returning to the present, the visions and nightmares of many ended. Yet the next morning dawned again clear and beautiful. There was a white mist covering everything around, and air was frosty and very humid. It was as if the air was laden with a little heavy rain. But soon, the reddish sun rose in the east, and the mists disappeared, just as they did when the light of the Spirit of Christ burst into the cell of a captive soul. And when the shadows were still long, they marched on again. So they rode on for 3 days more, but as if they were lost in a desert of mist, and all this time they saw nothing but sand, stones or rocks, low grass and isolated bushes, thorny plants and small thickets, and now and then small herds of ostriches advancing northward. Once Cadmiel saw the horns of a Dorcas gazelle that seemed to poke through the isolated bushes at night. At first he thought they were dead and dry branches, but after consulting with Samgar and Maskil, the most experienced men in the desert area, he could see that the desert was far from the inhospitable place many had thought it to be. During those strenuous days of marching, they heard nothing of the black vulture who had mysteriously joined the group, but no one dared to utter a word until the third evening, when they reached the port of Suakin, from where they could now look out over the shores of the Yam Suf, also known as the Red Sea. Finally, they had accomplished what they had set out to do after their escape from the caves. Providentially, they had reached the nearest port to Port Sudan, for which they had had to ride for quite some time after dark under a full moon. And as the light was fading, Cadmiel broke the silence by saying,
We have managed to reach the place of Samgar and demarcate it so that we could rest and claim victory.
Right after that, Cadmiel gave his comrades a tired smile and continued.
Let's stop now. I'm very exhausted. And the horses need rest or they will drop dead very soon.
They all rode in a wild and pressing manner from exhaustion. And, after arranging a makeshift tent, they stood for a while, wheezing and panting. Soon, however, all the members of the herd began to ask questions. They wanted Sir to explain well the matter of their escape, the matter of their having been invisible, and why they had been betrayed by Harim, a man who had been for several days in their ranks and who had had the opportunity to hear great mysteries. So interested were they in the whole affair that, for a moment, they forgot their most pressing problems: the shortage of provisions, the relentless enemies who pursued them, and the obstacles they would have to face on the road. But surely you too would like to know the answers from Sir's lips, and according to those who were present, this is how their conversation unfolded. They all sat and stared at Sir. And after a while, they were all wheezing and panting, all except Cadmiel. Long after the others had given up their curiosity for fear of asking, Cadmiel was still muttering and chuckling.
Sir, Guy! He slipped out in front of the Dark Angel, didn't he? Some power, sign or wonder had to happen. We were invisible by the power of Christ, weren't we, sir? No one among them could see us until the moment we decided to fight them. But oh, we must not forget, not for a moment, I say, and by one who came out of us and listen to the greatest teachings.
And then, right then and there, buff! Everyone in a burst of courage asked in chorus,
How did you escape from the Dark Angel, sir?
The voices in chorus echoed too loudly in the desert dusk.
Very well. I will tell you what happened when that Dark Angel separated me from the group to persuade me to deny Christ in private.
Sir raised his voice, and confidence seemed to reverberate in him.
It all happened after the Dark Angel received a hideous messenger who brought with him the edict issued by the Prince of this world, in which, I understand, was inscribed the final decision as to what was to be done with us. The Dark Angel, as soon as he received the messenger, became very tense, and his countenance changed. In the meantime, all of you were asleep, tired from the exhausting tortures. But I was awake after having 2 visions, for the Eternal One had not granted me the gift of rest, and now I understand very well why. The angel sat completely confident, with a haughty and implacable face. Suddenly, and after a silence that solemnized the importance of the message even more, he broke the seal of the letter with his powerful finger. And as soon as his gloomy eyes moved frantically, scanning the contents of the letter countless times, his face began to disfigure and became a much more gloomy and implacable face, full of despair and devoid of all confidence and vigor. Suddenly, the angel rose to his feet and began to strike his mighty captains with great fury. And just after he had slightly mitigated his fury, he gave a loud shriek that shook the very foundations of the cavern, which said,
No! No! It can't be! Why? And now, what will become of my reputation as an undefeated warrior? No! I abhor these Christians! They are despicable beings who, though weak and depraved, yet have a blessed meditator. No! They are the most fortunate beings in the universe. Thanks to Christ, they have been exalted even above holy Job. Was it not he who in his anguish, just after falling into our hands because of his sin, cried out saying, if only there were a mediator between me and God, someone who could bring us closer to each other. That mediator could make God stop striking me. And then, I would no longer live in terror of his punishment. Then I could talk to him without fear. But it is already clear that this is not possible, and I, in my own strength and righteousness, cannot reach him. No! That arbitrator is the Christ of God, the Messiah, who laid his hand upon these Christians. He has been the answer to Job's prayer, and is now, for all who are like them, their salvation. Now, these Christians, unlike the patriarch Job, have them that eloquent mediator, most chosen from all the beings of this vast universe. A mediator, able to announce to man his duty through his Ruach HaKodesh. He is the one to whom the thrice holy God can extend his scepter of mercy over every man, and can deliver him from descending into the sewer of the universe, the hell of fire. Now every man who trusts in Christ like these will find redemption. No! Quickly! Let no one among your spiritual hosts of wickedness hear of this, lest panic seize everyone in this cavern. Bring me the leader! What do you expect?
Then, when their hopes were dashed and the war against us was over, because of what was contained in the edict written by the ruler of this world of darkness, the most powerful generals among the Shadim arose, and led me roughly into the secret chamber of the angel. But oh, this time they took great care, for they bound me hand and foot and blindfolded me. Then, as I heard being led along the path, I was taken to a place called the Ring of Cosmos. There they laid me face down at the feet of the angel and tortured me. Finally, after a while of torture and curses, I was locked in the fortress of Perazmon, from which I was told no one had ever been able to escape. Neither angel, nor giant, nor demon, nor Shadim, nor mortal man. Vast and mighty were the fortresses that imprisoned me, for they were built by the Grigori, those watchers who fell with Lucifer on that fateful day when many of the mighty sons of Elohim rebelled. It is said that many beings were condemned there to remain for many ages before they were tortured and judged again. All this happened to those who were confined in that fortress. Unless, of course, because of their great suffering, they were willing to yield and were willing to submit to the designs of the kingdom of darkness. Suddenly, called the trumpets, and the angel assembled council, and they were divided in debate. Apparently this happened, for according to the edict sent by Lucifer, the dark angel and his hosts were to deliver us as soon as possible, for the adversary had lost at the heavenly tribunal. For every record of the decrees which he had dared to bring against us in order to gain the power to destroy us had been annulled by our Christ. For though we had sinned, we had in our favor that we have always occupied ourselves with fear and trembling in his ordinances, and have sacrificed in his grace, sanctifying ourselves. Then, many of the chiefs maintained that we must be delivered as soon as possible, so that we might walk in freedom throughout the earth, and that we must not be hindered in our mission to deliver the devils oppressed, for it did not matter if they lost control of some souls, for to lose the battle was not to lose the war. But oh, most of them feared that we would completely wreck their plans for dominion, and for this very reason, they pleaded very earnestly with the angel to persuade me to serving them, using the three powers of the world.
And what are the three powers of the world?
Samgar interrupted him.
The evil desires of the body, the greed of the eyes, and the arrogance of life.
Brahma replied.
Wait a minute. How did you hear all this from them? Were they stupid enough to talk all this under your nose? I still have many doubts about the veracity of your story.
Samgar raised his voice in order to stop Sir from going on with the story.
Very good question, Samgar. I'll answer it in a moment. As I was telling you, they all held their assembly in the Cosmos Ring, a huge, gloomy room that was very close to the cell where I was locked up. And it is clear that they kept their precautions, for during their assembly they spoke using their dark language. But oh, no doubt they were far from suspecting that there was an interpreter present.
Sir said in a warm voice.
So the Rosh HaKodesh helped you?
Aslan concluded in a calm voice.
The Ruach HaKodesh was always with me, and by revealing to me all that they spoke during their assembly, it was easier for me to resist all the temptations they tried to persuade me with, including the most compelling and effective one, where the angel offered me a great kingdom and the authority to exercise dominion over it. In this way, the angel told me, I could use that power to carry the gospel message. This temptation was too well disguised to be refused, but what the angel did not know was that the Ruach HaKodesh had already clearly reminded me of the teachings and the way our Christ lived. Thanks to this, I was reminded that no Christian can harbor any ambition for kingdoms and riches, let alone be deceived by them even if they come disguised with the ruse that these must be obtained in order to proclaim the kingdom of God. For the kingdom of God is not of this world.
At that moment, the faces of some of them became disfigured, for it seemed that the teaching had not gone down well with them. However, just as that annoyance was about to erupt in the form of a question, Brahma interrupted by saying,
You still haven't told us how you escaped from a cell as impossible as that one. When the angel and all his courtiers had already given up on the effectiveness of their plan,
Sir replied, glancing at the place where Samgar was about to explode.
The angel left the place, but first I heard him tell his servants to get rid of all of you, but to keep me alive. In the meantime, he would go and stand before the prince of the power of the air to gain time, while he devised some way of getting rid of me also. It was then, when I was all alone and hopeless, that I heard a voice say,
I know your works. Behold, I have set before you an open door which no one is able to shut. I know that you have but little power, and yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name.
And just at that instant, the doors of the least guarded place in the whole cave opened. It seemed that no one in the whole kingdom expected a prisoner to come out of that place, for as I had told you before, neither angel nor giant nor demon nor shadim nor mortal man had been able to escape since the beginning of time. But of course, we cannot forget that nothing is impossible for God.
Just a moment.
Samgar roared in a voice that drowned out all other noises. Everyone gasped at the sight of his face, unhinged with fury, uncertain, his countenance completely congested with rage.
If God was not really interested in kingdoms, why so many wars between his people Israel and their enemies? Did not giants and mortals of other kingdoms perish for a war whose purpose was to ensure that God's people would conquer the land, and that the children of Israel would have a nation and a banner? Were there not commands such as, Go therefore and smite Amalek, and destroy all that he hath, and have no pity on him? Slay men and women and children, and even the fatlings and the cattle and the sheep and the camels and the asses. Did not Moses destroy 2 kings east of the Jordan and defeat King Og of Bashan, the last of the Rephites? Is not the history of Israel full of battles and conquests, and of brave and valiant men who by faith conquered kingdoms, and did justice, and made themselves strong in battle, and put foreign armies to flight? I do not understand what you say.
Everyone shuddered at what Samgar was saying, for no one seemed to have the capacity to answer these questions, except Sir and Abir, one of the leading members of Christ's horde, who had always been with Sir from the beginning. He alone knew the details of this story very well, for Sir on one of his journeys had referred it to him. Suddenly, Sir cleared his throat slightly and, staring at Abir, beckoned to him. Then Abir, realizing that his turn to speak had come, began to sigh, and instantly they all embarked on a great vision, and for moments it seemed to them as if various celestial beings were telling them those stories as they traveled backwards through time. And this was what they all saw.
Long ago, when God revealed the effects of man's fall, and the evil hosts were rejoicing in their great victory over God's supreme creation, the history of the universe took an unexpected turn. One day, The feasting of the rebellious hosts turned to frustration as soon as they learned that the Eternal One had not given up on man. And as if that were not enough, he had prepared an amazing plan to redeem him completely. On that day, our first parents, along with the angels and demons, heard the words of the Eternal One, admonishing the ancient serpent, saying,
"Because you have done this, you will be cursed more than all the animals, and more than all the beasts of the field. On thy belly shalt thou walk, and dust you shall eat every day of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and his seed. He will hurt your head, and you shall strike him on the heel."
At that moment he turned to the woman and said,
"I will greatly multiply your pain in childbirth. In sorrow you will bring forth children. However, your wish will be for your husband, and he will have dominion over you."
Finally, the Eternal One said to Adam,
"Because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, saying, 'You shall not eat of it.' Cursed is the earth because of you. With hard work you will eat of it every day of your life. Thorns and thistles it will produce for you, and you shall eat of the plants of the field. With the sweat of your face you will eat the bread until you return to earth. For from her you were taken, you are dust, and to dust you shall return."
Then the Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife, and clothed them, and cast them out of the Garden of Eden. On that day, both angels and demons witnessed the first sacrifice the Eternal One made to cover man's shame. And so it was that many began to suspect that the garments of skin with which the Eternal One had clothed Adam and Eve were a symbol of what the Eternal One had planned to ransom man, a rescue that rested in a substitutionary sacrifice of an innocent and unblemished being. For it was already clear to all that a life had to be sacrificed before Adam and Eve could have been clothed in order to stand in the presence of the Eternal. And so it was that all began to inquire as to the true identity of that substitute who would have to undergo such a grievous sacrifice in order to redeem fallen man. Then, once again, the Evil One and his hosts gathered in council in order to carefully plan their moves to thwart the plans of the Eternal One. No doubt none of them could comprehend what was really going to happen, but they had no choice but to devise new plans to frustrate the purposes of the Lord of Hosts. Meanwhile, on the mountain of God, the hosts of light were dumbfounded at the knowledge of the Creator's plan. The days that followed the fall were full of tension. On one side, the hosts of light were ready to execute the plans of the Eternal One, and on the other were the fallen angels, watching with great stealth from the shadows each and every movement of man, while he remembered with nostalgia the beautiful days that preceded his fall. And so it was that the evil plan arose among the evil hosts to infiltrate among men in order to find the most effective way to destroy them once and for all. And to accomplish this, it is said that many of the Watchers descended to dwell among men in order to wipe them out, so that they might somehow prevent the advent of the Messiah or substitute. One day, the old stories tell us, the rebellious Watchers, seeing that the daughters of men were beautiful, decided that they would take them for their own. And as a consequence of this union, a new race of mutants arose to lord and subdue over the earth. And these became known as the Nephilim, the Hebrew name given to them by Moses at first. These Nephilim, it is said, were the giants and the brave, famous heroes of old who began to exercise dominion over the descendants of Adam, so that all in the heavens and on earth knew that this mutant race had arisen to stay and to overpower man, and would sooner or later succeed in exterminating the human race altogether. This was indeed a splendid plan, for it would prevent the coming of the Messiah. But they did not reckon that the Eternal One already had a master plan, a plan that was executed in due time through the patriarch Noah, who by faith prepared an ark and condemned the world and this entire mutant race to extinction. But alas, the confrontation between light and darkness was far from over, for the Evil One knew firsthand that man no longer had the right and dominion over the earth as before. Now, after leaving paradise, man was only a rational creature, unable to free himself from the power of the Evil One. So he soon remembered that all was not lost. He would only have to wait for one more term in order to eventually gather an immense army. So he decided to wait long enough for the Nephilim who had survived the flood to reproduce and thus unleash his full wrath. But one day, the Eternal One chose a man from among the Chaldeans, whose name was Abram, and made a covenant with him and his seed. This time and inexplicably, the Eternal had decreed that from his seed he would raise up the Messiah, the only man born of woman capable of destroying by death, the one who had the rule of death, that is, the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were all their lives subject to bondage. It was then that the evil one began to gather an immense army to fall in stormy weather upon Abram and all who met him. But one day, he hesitated and hesitated, and as he considered all his options again, he preferred to wait in the shadows for his strength to increase and his blow to be withering. Then, when at last he was ready for his most terrible onslaught, his pretensions fell to pieces as he carefully observed that Abram was a faithful man, capable of doing any bidding so long as he obeyed the Eternal One. Seeing in Abram a man of great obedience like Noah, he decided to reconsider his counterattack, for he knew that if he attacked Abram directly, his defeat was imminent. Moreover, seeing that the Eternal One had reconfirmed his plan to redeem man through a substitute, and that he had promised for himself that for Abram's obedience, he would give him his blessing and multiply his descendants, and that his descendants would take over the cities of his enemies, and that he would succor his descendants, he decided to hide again by wrapping himself in the shadows, as he had been wont to do long before. One day, after waiting anxiously for a new opportunity to smile upon him, he discovered a great instrument which he could use to destroy Abram once and for all. Lot, Abram's nephew, was the chosen instrument to carry out his master plan. It was then that he sent Pleonexian, his favorite messenger, to unleash greed and ambition among the men under his jurisdiction. And so it was that Amraphel king of Shinar, Arioch king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer king of Elam, and Tidal king of Goim, arose and made war against Bera king of Sodom, Bera king of Gomorrah, Sinab king of Admah, Semeber king of Zeboim, and the king of Zoar. In this way he succeeded in having the triumphant kings capture Lot and take him prisoner with all his possessions. Somehow the evil one hoped that his bait might attract Abram's attention in order to inflame within him the desire for greed and revenge. Only then would he cause Abram to lose his temper and launch into an all-out war to free his nephew, and should the Most High decide to back Abram and deliver him victory, the evil one would persuade him through his servants to receive the possessions of the Sodomites who were enslaved. No doubt the evil one not only relied on the multitude of his servants' armies to destroy Abram in his place, but he was fully confident that if for some reason his armies lost the battle, he would win the war by inflaming greed within Abram's heart. Indeed, and if he thought about it more carefully, that victory was all the sweeter for him, for he would finally cause Abram to stray forever from the faith and eventually regain his authority over him, have some fun for a while using him as his puppet, and finally destroy him in one fell swoop. This was the master plan he prepared together with all his servants, and he was persuaded that this time he would win the victory, so that suddenly a clamor was heard in his kingdom, and from all the evil regions the trumpets were called out to foretell victory. It is said that all in his kingdom were in awe and deeply confident of gaining the victory by this plan which had many faces, and which would sooner or later put an end to his enemy Abram. Again, however, his defeat was imminent, for Abram not only attacked his servants and recovered all the goods these kings had plundered, but returned all the goods he recovered to their owners, thus proving that the master plan of the evil one had failed, and that because Abram had a close relationship with the Eternal One, his heart had been forever transformed. Many tell that on that day shortly after Abram had won the victory and delivered the tithes to the king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, there was heard again in the far east the gnashing of the teeth of the evil one and the muffled beating of the drums that were beaten in the kingdom of darkness to solemnize the hope of victory. However, we are also told that on Abram's side, no one feared in spite of the noises, for they were confident in the Lord of hosts. That day, the evil one decided to retreat again because his frustration had been far worse than his defeat, and so he waited until his best opportunity presented itself. Meanwhile, Abram's testimony and faithfulness flourished before all the watchers in the cosmos, and earned him respect among all beings in the universe, so much so that his name was changed, and sometime later, the Most High visited him and promised him a son. Many say that the evil one shuddered at that promise, and through it, confirmed that the intentions of the Eternal One to redeem man in some way remained an uncertain but latent threat. However, he was immobile. He could not touch Abraham, so he had to wait anyway, for there was no other option against the friend of God. But, indeed, this had only been the beginning of many frustrations for the Evil One because of Abraham's life. For later, when Abraham received the promise in his son Isaac, the Eternal One asked him in sacrifice. Then it is said that all in the kingdom of darkness arose and rejoiced. Bonfires were lit on the floors of all their caverns and hiding places. Then they held a great feast, which would never end. No doubt they were happy, and all in the kingdom rejoiced, for it would be the Eternal One who would destroy Abraham, so long as he denied him his own son. Somehow they knew that no man would be able to give the Eternal One his own son, and they were all the more excited when they remembered that Adam and Eve were not even able to deny themselves of a forbidden fruit out of love for the Eternal One.
He'll never make it,
is said to have been the phrase repeated incessantly among their ranks. But what no one expected, not even among the angels of God, happened. Abraham offered his son in sacrifice, and so it was that the plan of the Eternal One was revealed, that he would be willing as Abraham was to offer his own son in sacrifice. It was at that instant that the unheard of began to announce itself throughout the universe, for undoubtedly Abraham had offered his son in sacrifice to the Eternal One, the Father of lights, and the provider of every good gift and every perfect gift. But the Eternal One would offer his son to ransom the depraved and rebellious men who had risen up against him from the beginning of time. Something entirely different and inexplicable. That is why it is said that on that day there was a great cry, and that the horns and trumpets resounded in the kingdom of darkness. The Evil One raised his head and looked around. He had forgotten about the war and about his servants. He had the impression that what was happening was not real, nor did it seem to make much sense, even to him. But at that moment he realized that he was in danger of being trapped forever in hell, all alone, together with his rebellious angels. He then decided that he would devote all his strength and energy to devise a plan to wipe out Abraham's descendants once and for all. Many say that he was not seen again for a long time in their ranks, and that from then on he devoted himself to devising many plans against Abraham's descendants. Seldom, too seldom indeed, was the Evil One challenged in the way Abraham was, so he waited in the shadows until an opportunity presented itself again, until one day a great shudder came over the kingdom of darkness when it was heard that from the seed of Isaac, God had chosen a supplanter to continue his plan for the advent of the Messiah. Then there was an uproar throughout the shadow realm, for they finally knew that their objective had changed, and that they would gain victory by taking out Jacob, whose reputation left much to be desired when compared to that of their former enemy, Abraham. It was then that they hastened to mobilize all their forces and strategies, for they knew that sooner or later, and thanks to the suspicion that had arisen between brothers because of a dispute over the birthright, their opportunity to strike an accurate blow would present itself sooner rather than later. They would only have to wait with great patience until Esau's suspicion would turn to hatred, and the latter would grow and grow as the years went by, and turn him into a murderer like Cain, that cruel man who dwelt on the earth with our first parents, and who slew his brother Abel as soon as he had the opportunity. And so the time went on, while the Great Crusade went on, and the promises to Jacob materialized, and his seed grew larger and stronger. But the Evil One waited and watched, and did not depart from Esau and Jacob, while he waited his opportunity. And at last, one day when the reddish light of evening twilight spread across the sky, and the brightness of the sun bathed the sad, gloomy faces of the fallen angels, it seemed to those who were watching over Jacob and Esau that the time had come for them to launch their counterattack. For Jacob was vulnerable because of the fear of his brother Esau. Then a cry was heard in the camp of the Evil One. Messengers arrived to report that a host of demons had seen that Jacob, fearing his brother, had sent messengers to his brother Esau, who lived in the region of Seir, in the land of Edom. Then the Evil One hastened and sent Anthropoktonos, his best warrior, who hastened and incited Esau to go out to meet Jacob with an army of 400 men and kill him. And so it was that as soon as Jacob received the news, he was terrified and separated the members of his household into two groups, and also the flocks, herds, and camels, for he thought,
if Esau finds one of the groups and attacks it, perhaps the other group can escape.
All say that during that time, the evil one savored his victory almost as if it had already happened, but in order to make sure, he sent his mighty messenger Phobos to arouse all Jacob's fears of his brother, so that the evil one and his servants would gain enough ground to destroy Jacob through his brother once and for all. But as the stories go, the joust in which the plan of darkness was, apparently triumphing over that of light, took an unexpected turn, for Jacob surrendered himself to the Eternal One and prayed, saying,
O God of my grandfather Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, you said to me, return to your land and to your relatives. And you promised me, I will treat you with kindness. I am not worthy of all the unfailing love and faithfulness you have shown me. When I left my home and crossed the Jordan, I possessed only my staff. But now all my household occupy 2 large camps. O Lord, I pray, rescue me from the hand of my brother Esau. I am afraid that he will come and destroy me and my wives and my children. But you promised me, I will surely deal kindly with you and multiply your descendants until they become as numerous as the sand on the seashore, impossible to count.
Then the evil one, instead of succeeding, was severely defeated, for the Eternal One proved once more that no matter what the wiles of the evil one, his eternal purpose would prevail. So he not only heard Jacob's prayer, but came down to fight with Jacob in order to train him personally for combat. Then, according to the old stories, the Eternal transformed his old character and changed his name, for none of them had earned him a good reputation in the 3 kingdoms. And so he got the name Israel, so that in all the kingdoms he would be known as the one who had fought with God and man and won. The trumpets called the fallen angels to leave the place, for they had already been defeated. Soon, the angels of light descended and witnessed the great work of the Eternal One, who in the twinkling of an eye changed Esau's heart. Then something unexpected happened. Inexplicably, Esau ran, and when he saw his brother, he embraced him and wept. Many say that on that day, because of that painful defeat, the evil one decided to retreat in secret to gather more of his armies and wait until the time was right to unleash his full wrath. Thus began a battle that no one had expected. For this time the adversary attacked on other fronts and took advantage of all his opportunities to cause a powerful enmity between brothers. Undoubtedly, this strategy was very effective, for thanks to it, the evil one succeeded in having Joseph sold by his brothers.
And suddenly, visions of the Eternal One overwhelmed them all as soon as everyone began to hear the story about the betrayal in Jacob's family. And this is what they all saw on that occasion.
Then Jacob returned to settle in the land of Canaan, where his father had lived as a foreigner. This is the story of Jacob and his family. When Joseph was 17 years old, he often tended his father's flocks. He worked for his half-brothers, the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, 2 of his father's wives. So he told his father about the misdeeds of his brothers. Jacob loved Joseph more than his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age. So one day, Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated him because their father loved him more than them. They would not speak a kind word to Joseph. One night Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever.
Listen to this dream. We happened to be in the field binding sheaves of grain. Suddenly my sheaf stood up, and your sheaves gathered around my sheaf and bowed down to it.
His brothers responded,
So you think you'll be our king, do you? Do you really think you'll reign over us?
So they hated him even more because of his dreams and the way he told them. Soon after, Joseph had another dream, and again he told his brothers,
Listen, I had another dream. The sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me.
This time he told the dream to his father as well as to his brothers, but his father reprimanded him.
What kind of a dream is that? Will your mother, your brothers, and I ever bow down before you?
However, while Joseph's brothers were jealous of him, his father was intrigued by the meaning of the dreams. Shortly thereafter, Joseph's brothers went to Shechem to feed their father's flocks. When they had been there for some time, Jacob said to Joseph,
Your brothers are in Shechem feeding the sheep. Get ready, for I will send you to them.
I'm ready to go.
Go and see how your brothers and the flocks are. Then come back here and bring me news of them.
So Jacob sent Joseph away, and he journeyed to Shechem from his home in the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived in Shechem, a local man found him wandering in the field.
What are you looking for?
I am looking for my brothers. Do you know where they are grazing their flocks?
Yes, They have left here, but I heard them say, let's go to Dothan.
So Joseph followed his brothers to Dothan and found them there. When Joseph's brothers saw him approaching, they recognized him from afar. As he arrived, they hatched a plan to kill him.
Ah, here comes the dreamer. Come on, let's kill him and throw him in one of those cisterns. We can tell our father, a wild animal ate him. Then we'll see what his dreams come to.
But when Reuben heard the plan, he tried to save Joseph.
Let's not kill him. Why spill blood? Let's just dump him in this empty cistern here in the desert. Then he'll die without us laying a hand on him.
Reuben planned to rescue Joseph and return him to his father. Then, when Joseph arrived, his brothers stripped him of the beautiful robe he was wearing. Then they grabbed him and threw him into the cistern. It turned out that the cistern was empty. There was no water in it at all. Then, just as they sat down to eat, they looked up and saw a caravan of camels approaching in the distance. It was a group of Ishmaelite merchants carrying gum, balsam, and aromatic resins from Gilead to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers,
"What would we gain by killing our brother? We would have to cover up the crime. Instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelite merchants. After all, he is our brother, of our own blood."
So his brothers agreed. So when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite merchants, came near, Joseph's brothers took him out of the cistern and sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver, and the merchants took him to Egypt. Sometime later, Reuben returned to take Joseph out of the cistern. When he discovered that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes in lamentation. Then he returned to where his brothers were and said in lamentation,
"Oh no! The boy is gone! What am I going to do now?"
Then the brothers killed a goat and dipped Joseph's robe in its blood. Then they sent the beautiful robe to their father with the following message.
"Look what we found. This tunic, isn't it your son's?"
Her father recognized her immediately. Then Jacob tore his clothes and put on rough cloth, and he mourned for his son for a long time. All his family tried to comfort him, but he would not be comforted. In the meantime, the Midianite merchants came to Egypt, and there they sold Joseph to Potiphar, who was an officer of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Potiphar was captain of the palace guard. When the Ishmaelite merchants took Joseph to Egypt, they sold him to Potiphar, an Egyptian officer. Potiphar was captain of the guard of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. The Lord was with Joseph, so he was successful in everything while serving in the house of his Egyptian master. Potiphar noticed and realized that the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in everything he did. This pleased Potiphar, who soon made Joseph his personal assistant. He put him in charge of his entire household and all his possessions. From the day Joseph was put in charge of his master's house and property, the Lord began to bless Potiphar's house because of Joseph. All the affairs of the house went well, and the crops and animals prospered. For Potiphar gave Joseph full and complete administrative responsibility over all his possessions. With Joseph in charge, Potiphar didn't worry about anything except what he was going to eat.
To be continued.